And most people don't even know the real story. Everybody talks about Michael Cohen. Everybody has an opinion. They have, some idea in terms of who I was, what I was. I was not, let me be very clear. I was not Ray Donovan skulking around the city with a baseball bat, hitting people with it as the media would like to have portrayed me. What did I do? I sued people. I sued people on behalf of Donald Trump. I was a lawyer. And that's exactly what we do. Now, some of the cases were, let's just say, less than on the up and up. It was a way for Donald to take advantage of his economic power, the fact that there were a dozen lawyers in the firm, in the office over at the Trump Organization, and it was generally contractors. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're a terrible human being. You're horrible. Look how many people that you hurt. Well, with all due respect to a lot of the people that got hurt, some of them were really lousy contractors, right? And the things that they had done were improper, and we did what anybody else would do. We used the law, not baseball bats, not golf clubs. And the notion that we have to make Donald Trump into Don Corleone and everybody that works for him is a consigliere or something to that effect, it's just not accurate. Fast forward all of that, I do end up coming out of Otisville. And I do have to tell you, even though it was what's known as Camp Cupcake, I never saw a single cupcake while I was there. And that really upset me. I was first told, hey, you're going to Camp Cupcake. Great. I love cupcakes. Just make sure there's some black coffee. I'm going to be perfect. Unfortunately, there was none. And it's very hard. Being away from your family, your friends, losing your law license, your family's happiness, everything. It is absolute torture. The entire judicial system needs an overhaul. So who was with me? Well, I had an actor, Mike the Situation, was there. It was absolutely a riot watching Jersey Shore. About half a dozen doctors, orthopedists, podiatrists, you name it. We had at least 24 lawyers. Billy McFarland from Fire Festival was there for a short while. We had accountants galore. My bunkie was a forensic accountant. We would talk constantly about the case and why. So going now to revenge, I want to really fast forward it here. Oh, before I get there, the unconstitutional remand, making me the very first political prisoner. Hello, everybody. Should be in the Guinness Book of World Records. I am the very first political prisoner held in my country because I failed to waive my First Amendment constitutional right, which is exactly what happened. This nonsense by Fox News. Oh, I was at Bill Bouquet eating a steak. It's 800 feet from my home, and I was permitted to be exactly where I was because I was on a furlough. So I get lured, and I talk about this in the book, I get lured down to 500 Pearl Street, which is the criminal case. And I'm saying, why are they sending me there? I'm supposed to go to the Bronx like everybody else for an ankle monitor. And a guy named Adam Pikula, who works there, says to me, no, we want you coming here. And I said, okay, fine, I'll go there. But something didn't smell right, didn't feel right. So I asked a buddy of mine who was a friend of mine since we were about the age of 14, also a lawyer, just to join me because I wanted a second set of eyes. We get there and they hand me two pieces of paper. Didn't look like standard government types document, which is something that looks like it's been photocopied 600 times. You could barely read it. And you could, luckily, if you figure out where exactly, your name is supposed to go. It was designed specifically for me. And the very first paragraph of it was that I would not publish the book. I would not do a movie. I would not speak to the press. I would not speak to the media. That my family would not speak to the media or the press. That my friends would not speak to it. And I said, wait, this is a violation of my First Amendment constitutional right. I mean, could we tamp down some of this language? And they said, sure. Okay, great. So they have me sit with my lawyer friend, Jeff, in the waiting area. And so I sit and I wait. And it was very sad because my son, who at the time was 21, was waiting for me in the front. He had come in from college. And it was rough. So he was sitting in the front. And all of a sudden, about an hour later, 3 gigantic guys, humongous federal marshals with handcuffs and shackles. And this was an experience that I don't even know how to characterize. They put me in a freezer. It was a room that must have been 40 degrees. You're wearing a very thin outfit, and it was absolutely horrific for about 3.5 hours, to the point that you're chattering so hard your teeth feel like they're going to fall out of your head, until they pull you out into a room which is like 80 degrees, 90 degrees, so your body can't acclimate for the temperature. And then they put you back into the freezer. So it's all a lot of mental torture. They run you around. I'm handcuffed and shackled. For what?
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, Africans. I hope you're faring well where you are, and if you ain't faring well, please fare well where you are. There is a Ghanaian proverb that goes, "The ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people," right? This tells you that small instances, if not taken care of, will lead to bigger issues, right? And for this case, the Ghanaian proverb is very right and is so much likened with the discussion of today. Destruction does not always come from far away. Sometimes it begins at home, inside the same walls where we live, inside the very system that are supposed to protect us, right? So there is a white man by the name Michael Cohen. He has a book named Revenge: How Donald Trump Weaponized America's Justice Department. Mr. Michael Cohen, who once worked for Trump, later becomes his critic. So in this speech that we are going to have a commentary on, Michael Cohen explained how Trump used the justice system not for fairness, but for punishment, not for truth, but for control. So what Trump was supposed to do with the Justice Department is not what he is doing. I think he's doing it to benefit himself or for selfish reasons. I want us to jump into this video, listen to Mr. Michael Cohen. Of course, by the end of the video, we shall also have a deep critical analysis. Let's dive in.
For what? Even assuming that I had done what was alleged and what I had pled to, we're going to get to that. Who gets handcuffed and shackled? I mean, this is a white collar. I'm not Hannibal Lecter. I was the former personal attorney to the president, which could be similar, but it's not exactly the same. And I think that the extent to which they went, this was all done at the direction of Donald J. Trump. So people turn around and they say, well, why would you say that? How can you possibly say that? Well, I'm the first person to get lured away from GEO, which is the re-entry system that's used, and sent over to 500 Pearl Street, given a document that was definitively written for me, though denied, and I get thrown back only to have people from Otisville there to drive me back. Now, what's amazing is today, there was an article that came out from, and it's an online newspaper called Ross Story. And the author, a young lady by the name of Sarah K. Burris, wrote, Michael Cohen's lawyer sent this memo days ahead of the SDNY shakedown. And it talks about it into my new book. And I really had something that I was going to go into more until I read this while I was on the train coming in today. And I just found it so fascinating that it took a small online newspaper to actually really get the story right. It's to me, again, is amazing. Michael Cohen's lawyer, Guy Petrillo, penned a letter to Deputy U.S. Attorney Robert Kazami that is featured at the end of Cohen's new book, asking for a meeting to discuss the Cohen case and the grand jury. This was, to me, the craziest thing. 4.5 months post the raid. And we have no idea what they're talking about. What are the charges that are being brought against me? Now, to anybody who knows me in the past, I don't drink. I don't do drugs. Never did. I mean, I even went through college here at American University, fraternity. I never had a beer. And I've really tried to live, not like a priest, but rather like an average person. I have one speeding ticket in my entire life. I've never had a parking ticket. All of a sudden, I'm confronted with 40 or 50 federal agents at the hotel, my home, which was 2 blocks away, so I was not on the lam, as some of the newspapers put it. I was 2 blocks at the most visited hotel, the Lowe's Regency in New York City. I had him at the bank where I had a safety deposit box because obviously my apartment was under renovation. We were flooded out by my next door neighbor. And also my law office, where there were another 20 or so federal agents. And it was an overwhelming experience. And for 4.5 months, we're asking the Southern District of New York, and my former attorney, Guy Petrillo, was the former head of the criminal division of the Southern District of New York. I mean, this guy wore the big boy pants in the Southern District, aka the Sovereign District of New York. And I want to be very clear, I have no love for these guys at all. So now we sit there and we're really frustrated. 4.5 months, I can't get an answer. What are you looking for? Let me know. If there's something I can help you with, no problem, right? Well, nope, no answer. Until finally my attorney decides that he's going to send a letter. It was at my request to them. We'd really like to know. We'd like a sit down. Well, they decide that they're going to have a sit down, but I won't be included into it. It was on a Friday. Okay, so he asked me if it's all right. I said, absolutely, it's okay. Now go ahead and call me when the meeting is over, which is exactly what he did. 5:30 p.m. on a Friday night, we find out exactly what it is. That I have until Monday to plead guilty to tax evasion, misrepresentation to a bank, as well as campaign finance violation, or we're filing a 58-page indictment against you that's going to include your wife. Now, anybody knows I live for my family, and there was no way in the world that I was going to allow anything to happen to my wife. It was just our 28th anniversary a couple of days ago. There's no chance in the world I was going to let them do to her what my attorney told me that they were going to do. They were going to perp walk us out on a Monday. So I had no documents. I had nothing. First time in my life having any issue with law. I've never, and I go into the book here. So I see someone just walked in, Lanny Davis, who was my lawyer and so on. Thank you, Lanny. And Lanny went wild. I'm so glad you walked in. Perfect timing. You can't, Lanny, why don't you come take a seat so I can see your pretty face there. So, come on. Let's go. Lanny, we're all waiting. We're all waiting. No, that's Barbara's. All right, anyway. So, Lanny goes crazy. He goes, this makes absolutely no sense. I mean, and we create a PowerPoint presentation that shows that there are elements in law to tax evasion, which is one of the things that I was given that I had to plead. And they wrote the allocution and everything. I spent more time going over the allocution, how I was to answer to the judge, than was spent on my entire case. There was no case that was brought against me. I pled guilty to a one-page information. And you'll see as I go through the book, it's very easy for someone to turn around, point a finger and say, well, yeah, it's your story. You can tell it any way that you want. In fact, we have FBI agents that were involved, starting with the earliest, which you may all remember, the Mueller report. The Steele dossier. The Steele dossier, as it related to me, 11 allegations raised against me. Not one of them is true. I do not have a dacha in Sochi next door to Putin. My father-in-law is not the largest real estate developer in Moscow, though I wish he was. He's never been to Moscow. He's Ukrainian. And they came to this country in 1973 because of anti-Semitism. All right. Then, on top of that, the claim that I went to Prague, which I've never been to Prague. I would like to. I hear it's beautiful, but I've never been. And I went with $10 million in cash in order to pay off a group of compromats on behalf of Paul Manafort. Truth be told, I wouldn't pay 3 cents for Paul Manafort. So none of this made any sense. Tax evasion, and I talk about it in the book. I've never not paid my taxes. I've never not filed taxes. I've had a CPA my entire life that I paid. Every single dollar I ever earned was in Capital One Bank that, by coincidence, was located at the base of the building that I live in. Not one single element of tax evasion existed in my case. Well, okay, what am I going to do? Put my wife at risk? The answer to that was no. There was no way in the world that I can do this. And from a Friday to a Monday, 48 hours, you don't do it, this is what's going to happen. This is what I refer to as the weaponization of the Justice Department. Donald Trump set the whole thing up. Why? Well, as soon as our relationship started coming to an end and things I refused to do certain things that they would want me to do, which of course was to stay quiet. That they wanted me to just accept the punishment, move on. Basically, as I had once said stupidly to Vanity Fair, that I would take a bullet for Trump. I probably would have, except for the fact that he was the guy pulling the trigger. And for me, that was a real problem. To make a long story short, Sarah goes on in the book Revenge, How Donald Trump Weaponized the United States Department of Justice Against His Critics. It walks through what Cohen describes as the dogged way in which Donald Trump used the government to make his life miserable, attack him, threaten his family, and ultimately land him in prison for a number of crimes Cohen explains that he never committed. The next one after these crazy tax evasion cases, yes, there was an error. I acknowledged it, and I paid that money. One thing that that Guy Petrillo was able to get the judge, William H. Pauley III, to acknowledge, I never owed a single dollar to any bank, to any banking institution, or any individual ever. There's no economic crime. So again, how could you have a tax evasion? What it was a tax omission, and I paid the money before sentencing, but I got zero credit for that also. Then the next one, which was the HELOC violation. Do you all know what a HELOC is? The home equity line of credit. I have 80% equity in my home. I had more money sitting in the bank than my mortgage plus the HELOC combined. And somewhere down the line, they turn around and they now holding me that I misrepresented myself to the bank. I mean, I've been doing business with this bank. I had 6 buildings. I had 197 apartments. I had, 52 taxi medallions between New York City. I mean, I had worked very hard over the course of the early part of my life. I didn't work for Donald Trump because I needed Donald's job or I needed his money. I was semi-retired at the age of 39. And somehow, like so many people in America, I fell under the spell of this cult leader. And I did things that I never should have done, including the Stormy Daniels. One of the things, sir, that you mentioned in the intro of me, that I had paid off Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. I never paid Karen McDougal. I was charged for it. I pled guilty to it. I was fined $50,000 that I paid for it. I never paid Karen McDougal. David Pecker did from AMI, the National Enquirer. I was just asked by Donald to look over the documents as a lawyer to make sure that his ass was protected in the event that David ended up going to Time Magazine, where he was supposed to be the next CEO and editor-in-chief. But somehow they needed to get David out of that too. Because why? Well, Michael was going to be the fall guy. Anything that was negative, anything that was wrong, just point your finger at Cohen. It's all right. Everybody started doing it. All of a sudden, you had Michael Avenatti doing the same thing. Now, all of a sudden, I'm skulking around Nevada looking for Stormy Daniels while she's holding a baby and they're going to some Pilates class. And I'm saying to myself, what next? What next? It was, and you're not allowed to say anything. If anybody's ever had any sort of an issue and you have a lawyer, the lawyer will say, judges hate. The judges hate when you speak. You can't do that. You have to stay quiet, stay home, do nothing. Okay, and so I did that. What happened? I end up with the 36 months. I was saying to myself at the time of the hearing, 36 months for what? And I couldn't believe it. I was so angry that I was forced to read this allocution that was prepared for me that I bit my inner lip so hard, and it was like you could see that I was playing with my side of my cheek because I was so angry that I bit myself, and I was just beyond nauseous watching as my father, who is at the time 84, Holocaust survivor, came, 4 children, all of us are lawyers. He's a head and neck reconstructive surgeon. My mom's a surgical nurse. We don't come from a family of mafiosa like they tried to say. I know people when I was a kid who were in the mob. Absolutely. Right. And so on. Who didn't? Right. I'm from New York. I mean, for God's sakes, it was crazy, but we never, we weren't part of any family. This is absolutely okay. Maybe now and then they give us a discount on some meat or something like that. But for God's sakes, it was crazy. All of a sudden, everybody's pointing their finger at Cohen. And I just became the fall guy for everything. Well, interesting, there's an old expression that the 3 things that will always rise: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And That's what's happening each and every day. More and more information seems to be dripping out. Now, for God's sakes, I wish the spigot would open and it would just flood out. It would make my life so much easier. Drip, drip, drip. We see Jeffrey Berman came out with a book. For God's sakes, this guy did one of two things improper. Either what he did, his actions are unethical, or they're illegal. He was contacted by Bill Barr, by Bill Barr's office, and they put pressure on him in order to expunge Donald's name and to pull back the charges against me and the plea that I had made to the Southern District of New York so that they could whitewash the document. And he did still whitewash it. Instead of the 40 pages, it was 20 pages. This is not the way government is supposed to work. And I just scratch my head and I say, where was this guy for 5 years? Well, okay, right. He needs to hold on to that information so that he could write a book. And I'm saying to myself, this is absolutely improper. It's like Brady material that they withheld that I could have used. Well, is that going to change anything? No. Why? Because I already did my time. And now I'm just on a supervised release that hopefully will be over very, very soon also. Sometimes you wake up and you wonder, whose life is this? Because I know that this wasn't mine, right? Yes, I had worked. I had built myself a life and a wonderful family, and I was enjoying every single day of waking up. And I can honestly tell you, from that day of that federal raid to today, there is no happiness anymore. There's no joy. I fight every day to put on a smile, to enjoy myself. I try to do it so that my children don't see, an unhappy father who's just dedicated. But one of the things that I also put into this book, because I think it's extremely, extremely important, is some issues regarding the media. The media gives Donald Trump too much attention. Whatever it is that he opens his mouth, he says he could burp, it's going to be all over the news. And it's absolutely horrific. I mean, we are the ones that are building this guy up. The sentencing report that I wrote with Petrillo and Lanny as well, it laid everything out. And I spoke to so many people in the media, some who I've known for over 2 decades, friends. I call these people friends. And I would ask them, did you read the Petrillo sentencing memo? Because the story that you're writing in the paper is wrong. And facts matter, truth matters, accuracy matters. But the media didn't see it that way. Like I said, I've never been to Prague, right? I can't tell you the number of journalists that wrote. Michael Cohen told me he was in Prague. No, Michael was in Los Angeles with his son, who was hoping to play baseball as a lefty pitcher for USC. And they went to USC and they asked the coach, and he said, yeah, they were here. And then the day after, I was on TMZ. I was on set with Harvey Levin, who's also a friend. And you can't be in 2 places at the same time. And people say, oh, you look so familiar. I'm like, it's possible. I don't know, everybody's got a doppelganger, but I've never been to Prague. And no matter how many times that you want to say it, I never have. And then it just explodes there, from the Steele dossier all the way to the unconstitutional remand. I mean, that was even more horrific than the first time around. But I want to lay out in this book, Revenge, which is, I believe I accomplished, I wanted to lay out the story of not just what happened to me. That's already happened. It's done. It's over. I have my own internal healing that I have to deal with on a daily basis. If Donald Trump, if Ron DeSantis, for Josh Hawley, Marjorie Taylor Greene, any one of these MAGA morons, just if they take power again, they now have the playbook on what it means in order to turn this country into an autocracy. The way you make a country, the way you turn a country into an autocracy, the first thing that you do is you take away people's First Amendment rights, their free speech, and you create a state-run television, media, newspapers and so on, like Fox News. All right, that's just what they do. What do you do after that? Well, then you weaponize a group of people. You take over the military. Those are the 2 things that we saw. We saw January 6th, and we saw what happened to me. I believe it was a test run. And I believe that the next person is going to take Donald's failures, because they are both failures, take them and figure out how to make them into successes. We've already seen what's going on with Roe. We see what's going to be happening with Obergefell and a series of other cases. The Supreme Court is out of control. Things that we have grown up with 50 years, for example, of Roe as stare decisis, all of a sudden gone. And where's the outrage? Okay, yeah, so a couple of days we see people shutting down the streets, picketing, yelling at, members of Congress. That's not enough. It's not enough. There has to be a movement. And we need to ensure that come November that we make sure that these people are no longer there. Because, and this is what I say in the book, what happened to me can happen to any one of you, can happen to every one of you, will certainly happen to a slew of people who are on Donald's hit list, his enemies list. And I can tell you, that hit list is probably longer than any scroll that we saw from King Tut's, tomb. I can promise you that. He hates everybody that doesn't sit there and flatter him and praise him. I know I blew smoke up his ass for over a decade. So I promise you, it's funny. We could laugh about him. He is an absolute cartoon character. When we first started the campaign was never supposed to be legitimate. It never was. It was supposed to be the greatest infomercial in the history of U.S. politics. I've said it on television a dozen times because it's true. When he got into the office, he realized what power was. He tasted a power that he had never tasted before, despite the fact, he was obviously the ruler of the 25th and 26th floor of Trump Tower. But nothing like this before. The most powerful man on the planet. And he refused to give it up. And that's why I said when I testified before the House Oversight Committee, my biggest fear, and one of the reasons why I'm here today testifying, at tremendous cost to me and my family in terms of danger and peril and our lives. My biggest fear is that if Donald Trump loses the election, that there will never be a peaceful transfer of power. That's a statement that we hear every single day in the press. Sadly, we hear this every single day in the press. But that came from my mouth going back 4.5 years ago. And I'm not prescient. I'm not Nostradamus. I just know the man. And I'm telling you right here, right now, today, in this marvelous bookstore, that if Donald Trump or any of his acolytes end up taking office or power, the America that we know, the democracy that we have, will be gone. And we will never get it back. So, blue wave.
So, Michael, you ready for some audience questions?
Oh, do I love questions.
All right, we got about 7 or 8 here. The first one asks, as Trump's former lawyer, how do you balance the obligation to protect client confidential information and the attorney-client privilege with the need to disclose what Trump was doing?
It's a difficult question. As it relates to attorney-client privilege, you may all remember that when they raided my home, they took 10 million documents. Oh, there's a great story. So all of a sudden I have 10 burner phones. No, 3 belonged to my daughter because, children, every year they have to get a new phone. And there were photos in them and we didn't want to throw them away. And I'm technologically challenged. So I put them into a box in our apartment, right? So that one day we'll find somebody who will be able to put it up onto the cloud or whatever, onto a drive, because they're pictures of them when they were children. So there was no burner phones. These were old Apple iPhones. One of them was even a Palm Pilot. The ones that, I don't remember, there's some young people here, you wouldn't remember, but the Palm Pilot was the original one that used to put a battery in order to charge it. By the time the thing charged, the battery was dead. You had to keep going on and on. So it was never activated because it never worked. You couldn't get a battery to last long enough to keep the charge. These were the things. You may also remember when they allegedly got some very special documents that were in the shredder in my law office. It was garbage. I had filled up my garbage pail with garbage, and so I put it in the shredder in order to get rid of it. Envelopes and things like that. The United States paid over at Quantico to put those 18 or 20 pages back that the media ran. Oh, we've got it all. We've got it all. What'd you have? You had a bunch of envelopes that I threw into there. 18 pages. That's where our money went. Thank you, Quantico, for your technology. It's amazing. So how do you end up balancing it? There was a special master that went through the 10 million documents. And I spent 30 days with this law firm at McDermott, Will, and Emery in the city, going through documents, recordings, everything, to ensure that there was no attorney-client privilege and that nothing was between just attorneys. So if you have two attorneys and, say, Ivanka on the document, on an email chain, there is no attorney-client privilege because having a non-attorney onto it breaks the privilege. Not to mention, Donald himself broke the privilege. He said, I don't care. Let him say whatever he wants. I have nothing to hide. Okay, great. You have nothing to hide. Now, look what's happening 3.5, 4 years later. We all know there was plenty to hide. There's also something called the crime fraud exception rule. And this is what the prosecutors do. They tell you everything is part of the crime fraud exception rule. So legitimately, you could fight till the end of time, and they will just continuously tell you, well, that's a crime, and under the crime fraud exception rule, it doesn't apply. So it's a very good question. It's a tough question. It's sort of something you have to take on an ad hoc basis. There were certain documents that were not released, and they weren't relevant to any of these cases, but they were attorney-client privileged, and so they weren't released. And I respected the attorney-client privilege. He owns the privilege, not me as the lawyer. But once, for example, Rudy Giuliani started coming out and lying and making statements about, oh, I transcribed this recording and that's not what it says. Well, okay. Poor Rudy, right? What an absolute shame. America's mayor. Could you imagine? It's like America's embarrassment. So, I said, just do me a favor and please just listen to it. Listen to it yourself. And then it was given to CNN, and I think Chris Cuomo ended up putting it out there. And lo and behold, that was the end of that specific attorney-client privilege communication, even though it really wasn't. But it's on an ad hoc basis. It's a very circular answer.
All right, next question. Trump has a history of cheating people in his real estate career.
What?
So,
can you do me a favor? Start that one over. Read that again.
It's an assertion that Trump has a history of cheating people in his real estate career. So why do supporters of Trump ignore that?
Because they're stupid. As I was, there's no other way to describe it. I constantly refer to the Trump organization. It is the cult of Donald J. Trump. You walk into the Trump building on Fifth Avenue, his name is all over the place. You go into the elevator, its name is all over the place. You come up to the 26th floor, his name is everywhere. You're drinking the water, it's Trump ice. It's Trump, 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 and you just don't get away. You want to have lunch, you go down to the Trump grill or the Trump bar. Or you could even go and get to the Trump ice cream parlor that's down there. Everything is there. That is his world. And so, why do people follow him that are in Alabama or Arkansas or any of these other, sort of incredibly red states? I don't know the answer for it. There's something inherent. It's like an inherent racism, sexism, misogyny, xenophobia, homophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism that this guy brings out in people, and they just want to express it. This whole nonsense with the Second Amendment that you should have a right to own an AR-15, and if you take away someone's right for an AR-15, that means you're taking away their handguns, their shotguns, you're taking away their ability to defend themselves. He manages to somehow appeal to the worst part of anyone, and they just latch onto it.
So this next question, has to do with one of the things that you were saying before that you get accused of. Did you help launder Russian money for Trump?
No. In fact, I don't know if that's even a true statement about Trump laundering money. Remember, I started in 2006, 2007. This allegedly was in the 90s, when this happened. Eric Trump made the statement, and I think we should get him up here, and he should certainly be able to answer that, though at the time, I don't even think he was born. Look, the kids like their father are just stupid. There's no other way to... Eric is the dumbest of the top three, and it's an absolute shame because he... Not only is he dumb, but he talks. So, if you're stupid, you should know that you're stupid and keep your mouth shut. It's about, my grandmother used to say that. You can't argue with stupid. Let them speak because they embarrass themselves. That's Eric. Now, Don, interestingly enough, happens to be inherently the smartest of them all. It's not Ivanka. Everybody thinks, oh, it's Ivanka, Ivanka, right? It's not Ivanka. She's the most prepared. She's the most phony like her father. But I believe Don is probably the smartest, but he's just, I don't know what happened to him, but for God's sakes, it's not the same Donald Jr. that I remember from when I was working there. He's lost his mind, and I have no idea what's caused it. But no, I don't believe that there was money laundering. In fact, we got to go back to the press on this one. The media made an allegation that my father-in-law, the big Russian mobster, right, who happens to be Ukrainian and was in the garment industry, he had a fabric dyeing company, until he ultimately retired, and not the Russian mobster that he was claimed to be by the press. Allegedly, my father-in-law loaned Donald Trump $100 million. I wish to God I knew where that money was today, but he loaned him $100 million to save him and his company. So I'll never forget, right after we read that, my mother-in-law turned around and said to my father-in-law, why didn't you ask me for permission? So it's comical. I mean, the press just makes up stuff. They go with it. Why? Because they're looking for those clicks. They're advertising money and so on. So I don't believe that there was any Russian money laundering in his apartment buildings, which are condominiums, and they're, the way you purchase them, like any piece of property, is called a fee simple absolute. That means that you actually own your block and lot number, not as opposed to a co-op where it's shares into that block and lot. Yes, there are Russians that own in there. Some of these Russians happen to be from Long Island that decided to move to New York. There are some. And we have the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has a floor, for example, at Trump World Tower. Does that mean that, he was laundering money from the Saudis? It's New York. It's it's the melting pot of America. So yes, there are some, but it's a very small number. And when Eric came out and said, oh, we have, Russians and they're buying our properties, he's just stupid. And he was running his mouth in order to try to prove a point on somebody that may have said something that he found injurious to his daddy.
So this next questioner says he heard you somewhere earlier this week predict that Trump will be indicted and indicted soon. But this person says that for months, they've listened to other people predict that Trump would be indicted, and he hasn't been. And he says he hopes you're right. But why do you believe so strongly that an indictment will be soon?
Because this is really the first time that the Department of Justice has gotten involved. Merrick Garland has been very, very careful, slow walking. And I said this yesterday on CNN. He's been slow walking this, so it's like molasses through a strainer. It's hard to imagine. It's like a drip of. This is the first time, and thanks to Tish James, our great New York Attorney General. Now that's a civil matter. That's just going to wipe him out financially, and she's going, I don't know if you saw today, she filed an injunction. She's so clever. She filed an injunction today against Donald so that he cannot move any of the assets and that he cannot hypothecate, transfer, sell any of these assets because they could be part of the settlement that would ultimately be due to New York pursuant to this civil case. But what she also did is she went ahead and she has now referred this to the Southern District of New York, to justice for tax evasion, which seems to me to be the low-hanging fruit. What are we doing? We should have done this from day number one. We all know that this tax evasion, they have now access to his tax returns due to that long litigation. That first was the lawsuit, then it was granted, and then he appealed, and then he lost on that, and then went to Supreme Court, he lost on that, and so they all now have his tax returns. Just take it apart, take a look. He took over, 170 plus million in refunds. We all know about the inflation of his assets for his own personal ego, as well as, more importantly, to get benefits from insurance and so on, and then deflate them for tax purposes. These are all crimes. Make no mistakes. If it was any one of you in this audience, you would be with probably me at Otisville, right? I mean, it's just, nobody else seems to have gotten away with it. And it's so blatant, it's so in our faces that for some, I believe now the DOJ has no choice, especially on the tax evasion charge, to indict and to move forward with it.
So here's a follow-on question. If Trump is indicted, do you think he'll end up doing time?
Yeah, so that's a really difficult question to answer, because I believe that he will be indicted and I believe that he will be found guilty. But do I think that they can put a former president in prison? And I think, unfortunately, the answer to that is no. And the reason I say that is because the former president, despite the fact he's dumb as a stump, he does still have enough requisite knowledge on briefings and so on that he could be a true danger to the national security of this country. And I promise you that he would sell any of that information to an adversary for a bag of tuna or for a book of stamps. He doesn't care. He's willing to do it. He doesn't care about this country. He believes this country is here to serve him, as opposed to what our founding fathers wanted, which is for the president of the United States to serve for the benefit of the people. And I think it would be very difficult. But I do believe that they would put him under a home confinement situation that would mirror the same sort of way that they operate the Bureau of Prisons.
So whether he's indicted or ends up serving time, this questioner asks, are all of these lawsuits enough to break Trump and his family financially?
Yeah, so that's the Tish James case. So I've been very vocal on this one. Remember that it's a civil case, and with a civil case, the bar is lowered, whereby he took the fifth on every single question for the deposition other than his name. In a civil case, you can use that in order to demonstrate guilt, or you can place that before, whether it's the judge or the jury, depending upon how the trial goes. He will be found guilty in the Tish James case. There's no doubt about that one. Well, now it creates a problem for him. And in her 220 plus page lawsuit, there's the statement that the settlement, the bar at the bottom of the baseline settlement that she's looking for is $250 million. And everybody started talking about that the baseline is the ceiling. It is not. I suspect that the amount will be somewhere between $750 million to $1 billion, which he does not have. No matter how many of his supporters keep stupidly giving him money, it doesn't make a difference. He will not have that money. So he's going to have to start selling assets. And what do we know? Well, he's got a lot of golf courses, but golf courses aren't income-producing assets, right? You're lucky if they break even. He gets away with it simply because of the dues and from the bond that people put up. But that bond is not his, even though he thinks it is. It's not his. When they leave, he has to return it to them after a certain membership number, which of course not one of his clubs ever reaches the membership number. So it's kind of like a little bit of a Ponzi scheme. Those assets are not income-producing. So what do you sell them for? Based on who wants to buy it, whatever you think you can get for it. If he ends up selling, for example, 40 Wall Street, he owns that property for $1 million. It's a 1.2 million square foot property. And let's say it's worth what Cushman & Wakefield is saying it's worth, $300 million. Well, he has taxes on the $299 million. So in New York, that's a 50%. So he's losing off of that $250 million, $1.25. So now he has only $125 to pay towards the $750 $1 billion. He doesn't have enough assets that have the liquidity in between in order to pay this amount off. And this case with Tish James will ultimately bankrupt the Trump organization.
So the next two questions are about two Trump-related things that happened today. And one, of course, was the decision by the January 6th committee to subpoena Trump. Do you believe that Trump will respect the subpoena and testify? And if you were his lawyer, what would you advise him to do?
So, first of all, do I think he'll respect process? According to Donald, process is what he says it is, right? Also, so I could declassify something just by thinking about it, right? Right. You know, it's almost like if he was able to do that, he would have like the Jedi choke on me right now and I would be on the floor, you know? The answer to that is he's not showing up. Now, of course, what does he do? Oh, big, brave, bad Donald. He's going to, I want to testify. I want to go before them. I want to make a whole thing out of this. It's not true. We've seen this act before. That's the whole thing. Why are we falling for the same nonsense again and again and again? How many times has this man turned and said, 100% I'm going to cooperate? Does he cooperate? No. I want to testify. I want the truth to be told. Oh, he takes the fifth 500 times. This is an old story. This is the same Donald Trump that's been doing it since he started his practice in real. So the answer is no. He's not going to testify. He's not going to respect the process. He has no respect for any of the 9 individuals that are on the committee. You know, whether it's Adam Kinzinger, especially, or Liz Cheney, Adam Schiff. He has no respect for any of them. So the answer is he will not. As far as what would I tell him to do if I was his attorney? Well, Morocco, I believe, Namibia, these are countries that have no extradition. And so he should get on his 757, you know, which of course needs to be fixed at the expense of his supporters. He should get on there. He should get the hell out of Dodge really fast because he's in very serious trouble. And it's not just him. The kids are in trouble too. Don, Ivanka, Eric, they're all in trouble. Mark Meadows, I warned them. You may remember during my House Oversight Committee when I turned around and said to him and Jim Jordan, I know what you're doing. I know the playbook. I said, you know how I know the playbook? Because I wrote it. And you can't run the playbook on me. I know it better than you do. And what's happened to me and the harm and the pain and the damage that my family has gone through, you're going to know it yourself one of these days if you stand by this man. And lo and behold, once again, prescient, I told him it was going to happen, and it's happening.
So the other Trump-related thing that happened today involved the Supreme Court, which rejected in a very brief statement a request from Trump to intervene in the litigation over the documents that were seized at Mar-a-Lago. You know, Trump had objected to a decision by a lower court to remove the 100 classified documents from review by the special master, and the Supreme Court said it's just not going to intervene. So the question is, what did you think about this decision, and what do you think generally about the whole Mar-a-Lago situation?
So the decision is obviously appropriate and it's correct. And finally, you know, they're doing their job as opposed to trying to play politics in the Supreme Court. I mean, let's just look at the whole Mar-a-Lago document scandal anyway. The guy is fighting to keep documents out of the NARA, which is the National Archives, and they're stolen documents. They don't belong to him. They belong to us. I mean, under the Presidential Records Act, they are not his documents. Now, some of them might be. I mean, he may have a letter from his girlfriend, Kim Jong-un, or Vladimir Putin, or something like love letters. I mean, have anybody here ever turned around and said, oh yeah, I got a love letter from Vladimir Putin. It was beautiful. The most beautiful love. And Kim Jong-un. By the way, I don't even, if that's who you like, it's great, but you know, at least tell them to get a better haircut. It doesn't make any sense at all. Love letters. It's just, who calls a letter from a supreme leader to the president of the United States a love letter? How about just call it a letter? Well, no. Maybe we can allow him to have that one. Okay, no problem. But you're talking about national security, top secret documents, ones that are, you know, marked not just classified, but the highest level classification that no one other than the guy who wrote it's allowed to read. That's another thing I don't understand. So if you're the guy who writes it and you're the only one that's allowed to read it, what good is it, right? Doesn't make any sense. Does somebody else get a chance to read it? Clearly not. But he has it. And he has it at Mar-a-Lago, sitting in his office above the catering facility for anybody to just walk up the 9 steps, pick the lock because it's a regular medical lock. I mean, you're not talking about anything sophisticated here. It's more secure, for example, that you said, than where the National Archives keep it. No, that's not true, Donald. That's just another one of the 38,000 million, billion, trillion lies that you've told the American people. It is not more secure downstairs in the subcellar. But I don't know if any of you saw the picture of the pallets of boxes that this guy took. If I was his lawyer in this one, the first thing I would have done is told him to shut up and absolutely say, I didn't pack any of those boxes. I have no idea. I don't even know why they sent the boxes to Mar-a-Lago.
So, after carefully listening to Mr. Michael Cohen's speech about Trump and how Donald Trump has weaponized the justice system, here is my deep critical analysis. First of all, to understand Mr. Michael Cohen's words, we must break them down piece by piece. This is what we need to do in order to understand how this speech affects the black people of America, and how it may affect you as well, who is watching this video. You see? Sometimes it takes a speech, look at its hidden meaning, its structure, and its contradiction. When we analyze Mr. Cohen's speech, we see not just a story about one man, Donald Trump. We see a picture of America itself. We see how the justice system, which was built to protect freedom, can be turned into a weapon. And for Black Americans, this story ain't new. The justice system has always been used as a weapon against Black people. From slavery to Jim Crow laws to mass incarceration, Black Americans have lived the reality of a justice system that often means the opposite of justice. When Cohen speaks of Trump using the Department of Justice for revenge, Black people in America can say we have known this weapon for centuries. You see, for people like Mr. Cohen, this is a very new thing, right? It's a new thing that has happened. They've never experienced this, according to them. But Black people, ever since the first slave ship left the shores of Cape Coast to Virginia and other states, that is where it started. That is where injustice started. What Michael Cohen is saying is something which is happening in the present, something which has always happened in the centuries for the Black Americans. So he used the word revenge, right? Revenge might mean a lot of things. Michael Cohen's main point here is that Donald Trump used the justice system not as a neutral tool, but as a weapon to hurt his enemies. Trump, according to Cohen, believed that the Department of Justice was not for the people, but for him personally. If someone crossed Trump, the Department of Justice can be pressured to investigate them. If someone was loyal, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, could look away, right? So this analysis helps to understand what does revenge mean in the context of politics. You see, revenge in this context is not just a personal anger. Revenge, when tied to state power, becomes oppression. It becomes the use of police, courts, and prisons to silence voices. Michael Cohen's speech shows us how revenge, when practiced by a president, weakens democracy. Now, if we apply this idea to Black Americans, we see a pattern. The justice system has long been a site of revenge against Black freedom. When enslaved Africans ran away, slave catchers backed by law hunted them down. When Black people demanded voting rights, the state made laws to make them not to pass those laws of freedom and democracy that would give the Black people power not to be slaves, right? So the justice system did not allow such laws to pass. When Black communities demanded justice after police killings, the system found ways to protect the officers. The weaponization of justice is not new. Trump's use of it is simply another layer of an old history, right? So there is this thing that has come nowadays. We call it Trumpism, right? You see, Trump is like a phenomenon. With Trump, we've seen a lot happening that we didn't see with the previous presidents, right? So Mr. Michael Cohen also explained that Trump's leadership is built on fear. People close to him feared losing power, feared public attacks, feared being left outside the circle. Trumpism feeds on fear, fear of immigrants, and fear of black advancement, and fear of losing white power. Now, this analysis asks the question, whose fear is being centered? Is it the fear of immigrants or the fear of black advancement and excellence? Trump's politics center the fear of white America losing control, right? The speeches about law and order are not really about safety. They are about controlling communities of color. When black Americans protested against police violence, Trump called them thugs. When white extremists stormed the Capitol on January 6th, Trump called them patriots. The contradiction is clear as diamond. For black Americans, this double standard is everyday life. The same justice system that harshly punished a young black man for small drug charges often finds ways to forgive a white-collar crime. Trump weaponization of justice is not separate from this. It is built on the same foundation, right? So the third part that I segmented was Mr. Michael Cohen's confession and the Black Mirror. Michael Cohen himself is not an innocent man. He admits that he once helped Trump attack others. He was a soldier in Trump's army of revenge. Only after he was punished himself did he speak out. Now, this analysis asks, what does it mean that truth comes from someone who once lied? For black Americans, this is also familiar. Often, changes come from the oppressed themselves, but when a former oppressor admits the system is broken, that is also a thing to believe, right? So Mr. Michael Cohen's story is a mirror. He had to feel the pain of injustice before he could see it. Black Americans have lived in this pain for generations, yet their voices were often ignored until someone from inside the system confirmed it. Another thing is understanding that revenge is not personal, but it is a system of using the government has three arms: the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive, right? So the executive is what Trump is using, and the judiciary, right? He's using the courts and he's using the police, right? So he's using these people to oppress other people. Maybe people who didn't vote for him. He's using the judiciary and the executive to carry out his selfish interests, right? So for black Americans, the danger is even clearer. If a president can weaponize the Department of Justice against political enemies, imagine what local police, prosecutors, and judges can do to ordinary black citizens. This is why the struggle for justice is not just about one man, but it is about reforming the entire system. If we continue to deconstruct this further, we see that Michael Cohen's speech is not only about Trump, it is about how the justice system, I repeat again, can be bent by power. Trump may have left office, or rather, this speech was done during Trump's 1.0. But the system that Trump was ruling at that time allowed his revenge to exist and still exist up to today that we have Trump 2.0. This is what makes Trumpism dangerous. It is not just a man, it is a culture that survives even without Donald Trump. Because we saw police brutality even during the times of Joe Biden, right? We saw it during the times of Joe Biden. Yeah, Joe Biden. So how can we see the relationship between Trumpism and the black struggle? Where is the relationship? Where do the two intersect, right? See, Trumpism, now that we have Trump 2.0, is still alive. Many states, such as the voter-oppressed laws that target black communities, many states push voter suppression laws that target black communities. Many leaders repeat Trump's language, right, of law and order. So the language of Trump is law and order, but it's really not about law and order. It's about a double standard. So while ignoring police brutality, we still have law and order, which is a false narrative. Many courts still treat white defenders with more mercy than black ones. Mr. Cohen's speech, when read carefully, is not just a story of one man's fall from grace. It is a warning about how fragile justice is. Black Americans today face rising hate crimes, widening economic gaps, and continued police violence. Trumpism fuels these conditions by giving cover to racism under the name of politics. Mr. Michael Cohen's warning is that if Trump or anyone like him returns to power, the weaponization of justice will only grow sharper. So in all of this, after understanding all this, where is the hope? Because sometimes let someone steal everything from you, but they should leave you with your hope. Your hope is your last dollar. And you don't steal a man's last dollar. You don't do that. You know, if you steal their hope, they have nothing to lose. And if they have nothing to lose, they have nothing to protect. You see where I am going? You don't want to put a man in a position where they have nothing to lose. So this analysis is not only about breaking down what Cohen has said, it is also about revealing the spaces for change. Mr. Michael Cohen's confession shows that even those who once served power can later speak truth. The cracks in the system can also be the doors to reform. For Black Americans, history shows us that in the darkest time, resistance is possible. From the civil rights movements of Black Lives Matter, the fight for justice has never stopped. Again, we shall go back to the proverb. The Canaan proverb that I told you about reminds us that the ruin of a nation begins in its homes. If America allows its justice system to become a tool of revenge, the ruins begins there. Cohen's speech is not only a personal testimony, but a map of warning. For Black Americans, it is a familiar story. The weapon of justice has long been aimed at them. Deconstructing and giving an analysis of Cohen's words show us that Trumpism is not just about one single man, but it's about a culture of fear and revenge. To fight it, America must listen to those who have long suffered under the weaponized system. Black Americans are those people. Only by facing these contradictions can the nation move towards true justice. Yeah. This is EFK Original Documentaries. You like what I do, subscribe. I'll surely appreciate. See you in the next one and stay positive.